What is it they say about the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain? Well, today it's mainly falling on the new Specialized Stumpjumper. So let's go and take a closer look at this new definitive trail bike. So this is the culmination of a 2-year project to redesign Specialized's benchmark trail bike. And to be frank, it kind of needed it. The last few years it's been behind the times. It's been conservative and old school on geometry, and there have been a few issues with the suspension that are not ideal, that we haven't liked while we've been testing the bike. And this is something I think that's not exclusive to us. A lot of people have kind of been talking about similar things, and Specialized needed to do something quite dramatic with the new bike. And what they've done is not just produce one Stumpjumper, they've got 6 different iterations, and you get to choose which flavour you prefer. So this is the bread and butter model. This is the Stumpjumper long travel, and there are 2 other versions, and they're all available in 2 different wheel sizes, so that makes 6 different options. So we've got the long travel Stumpjumper here. This is the 29er version, and there's a 27.5 version, and then there's a Stumpjumper short travel. Again, that's available in both 27.5 and 29-inch wheel versions. And then there's the return of the Evo model, which will be music to the ears of all you shredders out there. And we're going to take a closer look at that bike in a minute. But to start with, let's have a look at the standard long travel Stumpjumper and take a little walk around some of the details which you'll find common on all of the models. They wanted to look at pretty much all the aspects of the bike. You're talking about the suspension, you're talking about the kinematics, you're talking about frame stiffness versus flex. Stiffness not being the ultimate goal here, it's a balance between stiffness and flex, and then adjustability and fit as well. So all of these things have been kind of thrown into the melting pot, and different engineers and different parts of the Specialized design team have been looking into these. So if we're going to take the geometry to start with, the previous Stumpjumper is at the moment, because this is only just launched, a pretty small bike compared to more progressive modern bikes out there. And so the new one is longer. There are 4 sizes, small to XL. But kind of one of the reasons that there is the Evo model is that Specialized, being a massive global company, are in a little bit of a tricky situation, because they have to make a bike that suits lots of different markets and lots of different riders and riding styles. They can't just produce one Stumpjumper that's maybe, a little bit bigger than the one last year, and everyone will be happy, because there's lots of much more progressive riders that want something long, low, slack, and they're screaming for it. And so that's basically why they've come up with the Evo model and the standard kind of geometry as well. So if we're looking at the long travel Stumpjumper 2.9 here, this is a medium, but if we talk about the large frame size, there's a 66.5 head angle, 342 millimeter BB height, and the reach on the XL is a 470 mil reach. So it's not a huge bike by any means, but it's certainly not a small bike. And also you've got to take into account that the head tube length on the large and XL is slightly longer than some other bikes, so that's going to impact on the reach measurement. So actually, when you kind of put the two together, it's a pretty roomy bike. The Evo model is even longer. Bearing in mind how big a company Specialized is and how many different markets they sell the Stumpjumper into, I think they've done pretty much what we'd expect in terms of lengthening the bike. And what you've got to kind of also consider is that the Evo model is a little bit of a water tester for Specialized. They're dipping their toe into that water for the longer bikes. They're going to see what the market makes of them, and if it's the one that everyone wants, and if it's well received, then you may well see a more progressive geometry trickling down to the standard models. But definitely a step in the right direction, and we've been riding the large long travel 2.9 for the last couple of days, and it's a pretty good size for someone of like roughly average height, sort of 5'10", 5'11", even just about 6 foot. Anything over that, you need an XL basically, and I'd say anyone a lot more over 6'3", 6'4", you might kind of struggle to get the right size if you're a fan of that longer geometry, and if you've maybe ridden some longer bikes like Geometron and stuff like that. Let's also talk about the suspension kinematics, and as you can probably see there, they've got a new sidearm system, frame configuration on there, which is obviously inspired by the Demo 8, and other brands have adopted that kind of design on some of their enduro bikes, trail bikes, namely Orbea, but Specialized were there with the Demo before Orbea, and I think any kind of accusations of plagiarism are unfounded, because you've just got to look back a little bit further, and you'll know that Specialized were there kind of before. And the reason for it is quite simple, and it's kind of down to the whole chassis stiffness that they've been exploring. And kind of what they found was that in the larger sizes, the old stump jumper was a bit too flexy, and in the smaller sizes it was probably a little bit too stiff. So what they've done with the new one is they've kind of optimized these size specific kind of frame stiffness, and they've done that through ride feel, through putting them on the jigs, through putting them through the kind of CAD systems. And if you're kind of thinking about it in a kind of basic way, the smaller bikes have got a little bit flexier and a little bit lighter, and the larger bikes have had stiffness added to them. And with that, we're talking about kind of cornering stiffness. So when you're loading up the bike, between the feet and the hands, effectively, when you're out of the saddle cornering downhill, they detected a kind of vagueness in the XL size particularly, and they wanted to remedy that and make something that had a much more direct connection between front and rear, between feet and hands. And one of the reasons for the single-sided shock arm, they're calling it the side arm, is that it ties together the shock link anchor point here with the forward shock mount there. So you've got a completely rigid member between these 2 points, and they found that on the old bike in the jig there was actually some flex there between the two, and that is getting rid of that any of that flex in that part of the frame. So as you can see there, it's slightly offset, so that the shock's slightly offset to the left. There is actually room to run a coil in there if you wanted to, and it's pretty accessible for switching shocks as well. And they've gone to a standard metric shock, and they've actually ditched the auto sag system as well, which means that they can now run the kind of new breed of shocks with larger volume negative springs. So that's brought benefits in terms of support to the mid-stroke and kind of more supple at the beginning of the stroke. And it's not just a bolt-on fix for this bike. They've gone like literally kind of from a blank sheet of paper. Every model has had the shock tuned specifically to it. They call this the RX tune, and it's not going to Fox or RockShox and saying, okay, here's our leverage curves, can you kind of give us a tune, a few options, we'll go out and ride it. It's actually completely from the start. These are not kind of off the shelf tunes. It's all done in-house with the Fox and RockShox engineers. So out on the trail, a big improvement in the suspension feel, so a lot more support in the MIG-stroke and a lot more progression too, and this was always something that kind of held the old Stumpjumper back. It gave up its travel too readily, and you ended up kind of blowing through that mid to end stroke quite easily, and it never kind of really felt supportive enough when you were loading it up in turns and kind of G-outs and trying to get the bike off the ground, and this bike is significant. Something we haven't touched on yet is travel, and if we start with the short travel bike in 27.5 wheel option, it's a 130 fork with a 130 rear travel. The 29er version gets the same fork travel but slightly less rear, so it's 120mm rear travel. Then you bump up to the long travel bike, which is kind of the standard bike really, you could say, and it has 150 in the 27.5 option and 140 in the 29 version, and then it's exactly the same for the Evo model as well. So no increase in travel for the Evo model, but completely different geometry and slightly different kinematics. So that's the travels. If we start to look at some of the other points, the adjustability has been introduced, kind of like on the Enduro at the moment. So here at the shock yoke, there's basically a chip in the lower shock eyelet that you can flip, and you can go from between kind of high and low positions, and that gives you 6mm of BB height adjustment and half a degree of head angle, seat angle adjustment, and it will obviously affect the wheelbase a little bit as well. So it's also a completely standard shock eyelets front and rear, so there's absolutely no problem with running different shocks, getting kind of replacements and stuff. It's not a unique part like it was on the old bikes, and as you can see, the kind of shock yoke there is offset as well to bring the shock over. The SWAT has also been tweaked, and now it has a much more streamlined door on there, so basically doesn't have the kind of plastic moulding that the door used to fit into. Now literally the door fits into the carbon frame itself and snaps into place, so it creates a much bigger opening for you to ram stuff in there. So I think it's 20% more volume, and also part of that extra volume comes from the cable routing, which is pretty slick, pretty neat design, very clever. So it comes in at the head tube, and literally there is a guides running completely through the bike, and if you put your hose in at the head tube in the correct slot, it will pop out exactly where you want it at the rear dropout. So if you put in your rear gear housing through in the head tube, you just push it in, keep pushing, and eventually it will pop out by your rear derailleur. And if you want to do it for the brake, do the same thing, put it in and eventually feed it through, keep feeding it through, and it will pop out at the rear caliper mount. So like for people bleeding, building frames, maintenance, like amazing. It's like no messing about with fishing lines and magnets and whatever. It's just super easy to do. There's a new command post IRCC, so it's got the kind of serrated mid portion that gives you some fixed points of adjustment, but like multiple points for your seat height in the middle, and there is a longer travel versions of that now, so that's very welcome. It's gone from the longest being the 125, and now it's gone up to a 150 and a 160 version as well. So the bigger size bikes get the longer travel versions, and that's a big kind of welcome upgrade on the dropper post front. And they've slightly softened the top out, so it's not quite as dramatic a bang when it tops out, but still got a really good command post underbar lever, which I think is one of the best on the market. and it's a pretty rapid fire unit, but it does the job well, and I kind of like it, as long as you remember to either be sitting on it when you release it or be well clear of it, because you don't want to be getting caught up in that thing when it releases. We've also got redesigned stems and bars up front. We've got kind of shorter stems, a more DHE style stem, wider bars, plenty of scope to run different volume tyres. On the 29 and the 27.5 you can run standard tyres all the way up to, I think it's 3-inch front and rear, so you can basically decide whether you want to go 29 and then play around with plus 27.5 plus and kind of go into it that way, or you can get the 27.5 bike and then you can upsize tyre volumes and kind of go into plus that way. So you can basically come at it from either end if you want to do that sort of thing. It will happily, I think it comes standard with 2.6 tyres on most of the models, so pretty a good sort of halfway house for people that, you know, kind of like a little bit of extra grip comfort but want to have a slightly more direct connection with what the bike's doing and steering and kind of dynamic cornering and stuff like that. So really good butcher tyre up front on these as well. Really good kind of versatility in terms of whatever tyres you want to run. I just flipped the bike round here to show you another cool feature on the new bike, which is the integrated kind of chainstay protector here, which they did a lot of testing in the lab with slow motion cameras and basically shaking the bike so that the chain was flapping all over the place, and seeing where the chain contacted the chainstay and what was causing noise, vibrations, and kind of just general unpleasantness in the drivetrain. And what they found was that by introducing these kind of the chain would actually just contact the chainstay in various different points, kind of specific points, and they've made this kind of co-molded chainstay protector here with these raised kind of hillock sections that the chain basically can just impact into, and the result, and there's some under here as well, and the result is a exceptionally quiet machine, and that's, you know, it's a small thing, but quiet bikes are fast bikes, and when you don't have to be thinking like, what's going on behind me, is this my mech about to fall off, or, you know, you ride smoother when your bike is quieter, and kind of pretty cool, neat little detailing there. Also got a little Specialized own little chain guide, which is kind of similar to some of the other chain guides on the market, like the One Up and stuff. So that's pretty neat. So one of the other things that's going to have the world rejoicing is that no more press fit BBs. Yes, Specialized has gone back to standard threaded BBs, and I can hear mechanics, riders celebrating around the world on that one. Introduced on the Enduro last year, now standard on the Stumpjumper. Happy days. Now, those of you that have been riding for a little while will probably have fond memories of the Stumpjumper Evo, and that was a bike that pretty much started a revolution in trail bikes in terms of fun and capability, and being able to complete outride what you would expect a trail bike to be able to do. And that Evo name is back, and that's pretty exciting things. I'm pretty excited about this bike here. Been lucky enough to have been out on it today riding it, and it's an absolute blast, I've got to say. Once the speeds go up into like 20 miles an hour plus, the terrain gets rough and it's swoopy, it's fun, and you're having a right giggle. This bike is the one you want to be on, and I'm excited to ride it some more. Just a few quick numbers on it, and probably one of the most progressive ones is the head angle. That's 63.5 degree head angle, so proper slack. And if we go to reach measurement on the larger of the two sizes, they call it S2 and S3. S3 is the bigger bike, and that has a 475mm reach, but a really low head tube. As you can see, you've got quite a lot of spaces under the stem there, so you can have it pretty pretty stretched out if you want in terms of the bar position, or you can put a few spaces under there, get back behind the front wheel a bit and moto. And so yeah, 475. The BB height is sub 330, it's about 328. Does have the adjustable geometry chip in there as well, and you're looking at a 1250 mil wheelbase on the larger size, and that's chainstay length is 443. So pretty well balanced, not super short chainstay, so you're not going to be feeling like the back wheel's tucked right under your feet. You're not going to feel like you're on a unicycle or something. It's well balanced. It loves to go fast. The kinematics have been made a little bit more aggressive and progressive, so a little bit harder to bottom out, a little bit more support. It's super poppy and agile, and it might not be the lightest bike on the scales, but get it on the trail and it definitely rides a lot lighter than it suggests. This is the 29er version. There's a 27.5 version as well, so this is 150 at the front, 140 at the back. The 27.5 version is 150, 150. Burley Butcher tyres on there, absolute blast, and this is probably one of the highlights of the range for me. Alloy frame, still got the sidearm, probably going to be pretty good value. They've obviously invested in the parts that are important to a gravity biased bike, so you've got remote reservoir shock there, grip damper fork, and Vox DPX2 shock with an Evil can work beautifully, I've got to say. At high speed they're just buttery smooth, and you can really just like open the taps and go as fast as you want. It's really is a capable machine. So if you prefer going downhill to pedaling, because you will clip your pedals on this thing if you're pedaling a lot on kind of rough terrain, it is a gravity sled for people who like that sort of thing, and if you do, it's just going to be right up your street. So pretty excited. Specialized have brought the Evo name back. So there we have the new stump jumper, some big steps forward for it, and a really interesting story, a lot of detail, really gone to town with this bike, and it's obviously a super important bike for Specialized. It's going to be really interesting to stack it up against some of the best bikes on the market right now and see how it performs, and we'll be doing that very soon, so check back for some test videos later on, and hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below and remember to subscribe. Thank you very much.